The ballroom went quiet. So quiet. The chandeliers above seemed to hum with the weight of silence. Maxwell's victory banners, once symbols of triumph, now hung like accusations. Scarlet cloth turned into bloodstains beneath the glare of the projector as files exploded across the screen. Wire transfers, burner phones, a signature he could never deny. Cameras blinked like watchful eyes. Donors recoiled, their chairs scraping the marble floor. Maxwell tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came. When the agent stepped forward, his smile cracked. And in that instant, I saw fear crawl up his spine like ice. I didn't raise my voice. I only whispered, "You taught me how to wait." And that was the moment the man I married finally met the truth. My name is Chloe Moore. I am 43. Once I was the quiet wife beside a rising star. I managed schedules, shook hands, smiled for cameras. I learned how to disappear behind his shadow, invisible. Yet invisibility sees everything. And when Maxwell chose to erase me, I chose to remember. Every secret, every betrayal, every thread he thought was buried in the dark. It began on a night that looked ordinary, too ordinary. The house was silent. The clock ticked softly in the kitchen, steady, patient, a metronome for betrayal. I walked downstairs for a glass of water, and then I heard him. His voice was low, sharp, laced with the cruelty I knew too well. "She's unstable," he hissed into the phone. "We'll push for divorce next quarter. I'll get the firm to lock her accounts, freeze everything. She'll be finished before she even knows what's happening." I froze in the doorway. My fingers gripped the counter so tight the glass nearly shattered in my hand. The man who once promised me forever was dismantling me like a problem to be solved. A silence followed on the line, then his voice again. Calm, calculated, venom wrapped in silk. "No one will question it. She's been quiet for years. Perfect narrative. I'll come out clean, and she'll fade." I pressed my lips together so hard I tasted blood. My throat ached with the scream I would not let out. I wanted to throw the door open. I wanted to tear the phone from his hand. I wanted to rip the mask from his face and show the world what I already knew. But I didn't. I listened. And I memorized every word. He wanted me small. So I became smaller until I fit inside his blind spot. When his footsteps faded down the hall, I slipped into his study. The glow of his laptop burned across the desk, pale and accusing. My hands trembled as I touched the mouse. His inbox was open, and there it was, an email that reeked of rot. Transfer confirmations, large sums, political action committee funds routed through shell donors, and one name on the receiving end, a name I already suspected. Lena Carter, his young assistant, his secret, his obsession. My breath caught in my throat. Not just betrayal of the heart, but betrayal of the law, betrayal of the public, betrayal of everything he pretended to stand for. He had built a kingdom on lies, and he was feeding it with stolen money. I saved the files before he returned. My pulse raced so hard I thought he would hear it echoing through the walls. I slipped back into bed, lay perfectly still as his weight sank beside me. He never noticed the slight shake in my hands beneath the sheets. The next morning, I smiled at breakfast. I poured his coffee. I asked about his meetings. He kissed my cheek, without looking into my eyes. To him, I was already gone. To me, I was just beginning. I sat at the table long after the door closed. Sunlight crawled across the floor like a slow revelation, and I whispered to myself, "You won't erase me. Not like this." My phone was heavy in my palm. I scrolled through old contacts, names I had not dared to touch since I had left my career behind. Journalists, investigators, the ones who still chased truth, while I had surrendered mine to him. But it was not to an old friend that I finally typed. It was to a number I had kept hidden for years, a source, someone who owed me a favor once upon a time. My thumbs hovered above the keys. My heart pounded so hard I thought the phone might slip from my grip. I typed only 4 words: simple, final, a declaration that the game had changed. I'm ready to talk. And with that message sent, the shadow he thought was harmless began to move. I knew what I had to do. Secrets alone would never be enough. Whispers had always circled Maxwell more. Backroom deals, campaign money slipping through invisible cracks, envelopes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. But scandals had never touched him. He was Teflon, shielded by money, by arrogance, by the certainty that the world bent for men like him. Rumors would not bring him down, only proof. Proof carved into paper and ink, hidden in contracts he thought were his weapons, but were, in truth, my snare. So I built the trap, Mariner Bridge LLC, a hollow name, a faceless shell, a desk, a bank account, a company without flesh, only skeleton. On the surface, it was nothing, just another ghost drifting in the financial fog. But in its bones, it was my weapon. I hired an accountant, independent, discreet, someone who knew how to keep secrets without even looking like she was keeping them. Together, we drafted contracts, consulting services, media strategy, outreach. The very phrases Maxwell had used for years to wash his money clean. Except this time, every comma, every clause was sharpened into a blade. Evelyn Hart was the first to step into the circle. She knew Maxwell's corruption. She had once been his subordinate, forced to alter reports until her conscience snapped in two. She had walked away from him once, and she had walked away with her integrity intact. When I laid the file in front of her, her fingers lingered on the edge of the page. Her eyes moved quickly, faster than mine could follow. Then her lips curved in a smile that wasn't soft, wasn't kind. It was the smile of a woman who had been waiting for this day. "He won't read the appendix," she whispered, almost amused. Her pen tapped the clause hidden like a landmine. "He never does." I could almost hear the snap of the trap closing. Jonah Reed came next. A journalist once silenced by Maxwell's reach, his story killed before it ever touched print. He carried his wound like a scar that never closed. We met in a cafe far from the capital, the hum of the city muffled by the hiss of the espresso machine. His eyes were sharp, restless, as though scanning every corner of the room for the ghosts of old enemies. He slid a hard drive across the table. The casing was dented, scratched, yet when my hand closed around it, the weight was undeniable. Buried stories, recordings, numbers, all pressed into cold metal, a graveyard waiting to rise. "You bring the receipts," Jonah said, voice low but steady. "I bring the floodlights." I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. In that small cafe, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. This was no longer an idea, it was alive. But to win, I had to disappear into the role Maxwell had written for me, the fragile wife, the unstable woman. I scheduled therapy sessions, sat in empty rooms while clocks ticked, left pamphlets where he could find them, let my eyes redden with false exhaustion. I became his portrait of weakness, and he believed it. He told his aides I was unraveling. He hinted to allies that I was slipping, that Chloe Moore was delicate. He planted stories of my decline with the same hand that signed campaign checks, and every time he did, I smiled behind the mask. The deeper he buried me in his narrative, the closer he came to falling into mine. Nights bled into mornings as Evelyn and I combed through the contracts. Every page looked ordinary, every line invisible in its trap-like precision. Transfers flowed in circles so tidy they seemed untouchable, until the moment the curtain would be torn back. Then the day came. Maxwell sat behind his polished desk, flipping through the documents. His fingers barely slowed as his pen scratched across the lines. Blue ink bled his name onto paper after paper. He didn't pause, didn't question. The sound of the pen cap snapping shut was louder than thunder in my ears. He handed the folder back to his aide, already speaking of the next rally, the next donor, the next conquest. His voice was smooth, confident, certain, because he believed he had just completed another transaction. Another invisible crime no one would trace. But he never saw me watching, and in that instant, as his initials dried across my carefully constructed snare, I felt the air shift. Maxwell Moore, the man who thought himself untouchable, who had built an empire of shadows, had just signed his name into my design. He thought he was funneling money the way he always had, but this time, every cent was flowing straight into my hands, and soon the floodlights would blaze. Paper trails were powerful, but they could be denied. Contracts, emails, signatures. Maxwell always found a way to twist them, to smear mud until no one knew what was true and what was fabricated. He had turned denial into an art form. He had outlived 1,000 accusations with nothing but arrogance and spin. What I needed now was different. Not more paper, not another clause, not another signature. I needed a living witness, a voice, a face, proof no one could bury. That witness was Trent Calloway. He had been Maxwell's right hand for years, his loyal aide, his shadow in every backroom deal, the man who fetched his secrets and locked them away. But loyalty, true loyalty, meant nothing to Maxwell. Not when greed stood in the way, not when ego wanted blood. And I had the proof, a recording. Maxwell's voice, sharp as a blade. You're replaceable, Trent. Don't mistake proximity for value. The words cut deeper than any knife. When I replayed them in the quiet of my room, I could almost feel Trent's humiliation bleeding through the silence. That humiliation was my opening. So I sent a message. No preamble, no plea, just a time and a place. The parking lot was drowning in rain when he came. Streetlights flickered like dying stars. Water hammered the pavement, bouncing against my shoes. Trent's coat was soaked through. His hands trembled as he tried to light a cigarette. 1, 2, 3 times, the flame dying each time against the wind. His eyes looked hollow, defeated, beaten down by the very man he had sworn himself to. He'll bury me, he whispered finally, his voice cracked. Almost lost in the storm, I stepped closer, the rain sliding cold down my face. He already did, I said softly. I'm just digging you out. He stared at me then. Suspicion, fear, searching for a trap, but all he found was someone who knew exactly how deep the knife had cut him. Inside his car, the air was thick with damp leather and smoke. The heater hummed, failing to chase away the chill. His hands twitched on the wheel, restless, unmoored. That was when I laid the offer on the table. Evelyn would prepare an affidavit, immunity in exchange for the truth. But I needed more. His schedule of closed meetings, his burner numbers, and the draft of Maxwell's big campaign speech, the one where he would thunder about law and order while standing on a mountain of lies. Trent hesitated. His fingers tapped against the steering wheel, sharp, nervous beats in the silence. If he finds out, he whispered. I cut him off. Then you'll be free sooner than you think. The silence stretched, heavy as lead. Finally, he exhaled, long and broken. He reached for the glove box, a folder, a drive. His hands shook as he passed them to me. Every king fears the night that changes sides. Later that night, I opened the laptop. Inside the drive was more than I expected. Not just numbers, not just schedules. It was a video, grainy, time-stamped, but unmistakable. Stacks of cash sliding across a table. Envelopes passed like gifts. Maxwell's operatives grinning as they bought votes in a forgotten county. Their voices low but clear enough. Promises of numbers. Promises of victory. I watched in silence. My breath came slow, steady. Because this was not evidence you could spin. This was not a rumor you could bury. It was the kind of proof no donor could excuse. The kind of proof no ally could shield. Trent sat across from me, hollow, drained. His voice broke when he finally spoke. This will burn him alive. I closed the laptop gently. My whisper was colder than fire. No, This will bury him. The pieces were all in place now. The contracts, the witness, the recordings, the video. Maxwell had built his empire on shadows, but I was about to drag every one of them into the light. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the calendar. The date of his campaign launch gleamed back at me like a warning, like a promise. I set the stream, synced the reveal. The countdown ticked into motion. When Maxwell Moore stepped on stage to declare his future, the world would hear mine. And nothing, no power, no ally, no mask, could save him from what was coming. The ballroom glittered with light. Crystal chandeliers spilled brilliance from above. Velvet banners draped the walls like royal cloaks. Cameras flashed like lightning in a summer storm. Maxwell had staged his triumph. A perfect night. For a perfect lie. I stood near the front row, silent, invisible, as always. The fragile wife, the shadow, the mask he had crafted for me. The crowd erupted when he walked to the podium. Their cheers rolled like a tide against the gilded walls, crashing higher and higher. Maxwell soaked it in, smiling wide, his hand lifted in that same polished gesture of confidence he had rehearsed for decades. A king bathing in borrowed light. Jonah was in the wings, his laptop open, the live stream pulsing like a heart about to burst. Evelyn was already gone, her sealed package placed safely in the hands of the prosecutor. The clock ticked. Every second echoed like a drumbeat in my chest. The stage was set. Maxwell leaned toward the microphone. His voice, smooth, rehearsed, dripping with charm, washed over the ballroom. Tonight we begin a new era of law and order. And then, the screen behind him flickered. First came the contract, Mariner Bridge LLC, bold, undeniable, projected story high. His signature scrawled in blue ink, frozen in time for everyone to see. The crowd gasped, the image froze in place, undeniable, inescapable. Next came the transfers, wire routes snaking across the globe like veins of corruption, glowing red, pulsing like diseased arteries. Names, dates, numbers, everyone connected, everyone damning. Then the photographs. Maxwell, caught in shadows, leaning close to a donor in a back room, his hand gripping an envelope, his smile stretched too wide, too hungry, too greedy. And finally, the video. Grainy, time-stamped, but unmistakable. Stacks of cash sliding across a table, envelopes shoved forward like offerings to a false god, operatives grinning, laughing, their voices sharp and clear, promising numbers, promising victory. Every sound captured, every lie preserved forever. The ballroom erupted. Gasps, shouts, a wave of noise crashing against the ceiling, rattling the crystal. Phones shot up like a forest of arms, glowing screens spreading the truth to millions beyond these walls. Donors shifted in their seats, their smiles curdled, hands tightening on champagne glasses. Some turned away, stepping back, eager to erase their faces from his downfall. Cameras zoomed in, hungry, relentless, the fall of a titan, unfolding in real time. Maxwell spun around, his face draining pale beneath the stage lights. And then, he saw me. Our eyes locked. And in that instant, his mask cracked. "You set me up!" he roared, his voice breaking, echoing across the mic like a confession. I stepped forward, calm, steady. Every movement deliberate, honed sharp like a blade. The silence of the crowd tightened around me, drawn taut as a drum. "No," I said. My voice cut through the chaos like glass shattering. I kept the receipts. The crowd exploded. Cheers, shouts, a roar that shook the chandeliers above our heads. Camera flashes burst like fireworks, igniting the velvet walls in blinding light. His allies froze, their loyalty crumbling. His enemies leaned forward, savoring the moment. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, irreversible. And then, the agents moved. Black suits slicing through the chaos, their badges gleaming like blades under the lights. Maxwell staggered back, his hand trembling as if he could push them away, as if arrogance alone could stop the tide. His smile twitched. desperate, brittle, trembling at the edges, and failed. The donors turned their backs. The ballroom shifted as one body, the tide rising against him. I walked closer, slow, unhurried, each step a verdict, each breath a sentence. He trembled, sweat glistening across his forehead. The microphone was still live when I leaned in, my words, soft, sharp for him and for the world. You taught me patience. I taught you consequence. His knees faltered, and for the first time, Maxwell Moore looked small. The agents closed in. The crowd surged forward, reporters shouting, voices colliding, cameras flashing in a storm of light that seemed endless. Maxwell turned, stumbling toward the exit. He still believed escape existed. He shoved through the curtains, pushed open the door to the backstage corridor, and froze. On the other side waited the wall of press. Reporters shoulder to shoulder, microphones bristling like weapons, cameras glowing like searchlights. Federal agents standing firm, their eyes locked on him like executioners awaiting command. Every eye fixed on the man who once thought himself untouchable. The door swung shut behind him, and Maxwell Moore, the master of shadows, the king of illusions, had nowhere left to run. The storm was over, but the wreckage remained. Maxwell's empire collapsed in a single week. An empire that had taken decades to build, toppled like glass under a hammer. Investigators swarmed through his offices, their gloves pale against the dark wood of his mahogany desk. Box after box of files carried out under flashing cameras, the light of justice mixing with the feverish light of scandal. Every folder stamped with evidence, every slip of paper a betrayal he once believed invisible. Financial violations, election fraud, bribery. The words bled across headlines, black ink screaming his name. The man who once commanded rooms with nothing but a smile, now flinched under the glare of microphones, his jaw tight, his answers brittle, his eyes hollow. He had always loved attention, but attention had turned on him. Sharp, merciless, hungry. Donors abandoned him without hesitation. Men and women who once toasted him in champagne halls now erased his number from their phones. They cut the checks. They closed the doors. His name turned from an asset into a disease. The campaign that had once promised triumph collapsed overnight. Banners drooped in the rain, their bold letters bleeding ink. Field offices shuttered, chairs overturned, phones left ringing to no one. Victory speeches that had been rehearsed in mirrors evaporated like smoke. His allies vanished. The ones who had cheered loudest were suddenly silent, and his enemies, they circled with smiles, sharpened into knives, waiting to devour what was left. And me, I stood at the courthouse, papers trembling in my hands. The divorce he thought would bury me, the weapon he had prepared to break me, had turned, like a blade twisting in his own hand. The judge's voice rang steady, every syllable precise, like the toll of a bell. Assets shared, compensation ordered. His deceit, once whispered, now recorded in official ink, irrefutable, public. I left the building with the decree tucked under my arm. For the first time in years, the air outside did not choke me. It touched my face like freedom, a freedom that was mine, earned, fought for, wrestled from the jaws of the man who had tried to erase me. The mansion loomed behind me when I packed the last box. Marble floors that had once echoed with his triumphant footsteps now echoed with silence. Gilded halls, chandeliers, velvet drapes, every luxury heavy with the stench of lies. I walked through it one last time. The dining table where he had whispered strategies. The office where he had plotted his rise. The bedroom where silence had crushed me night after night. Every corner held a shadow I no longer belonged to. I closed the door without looking back. The slam was not loud, but it echoed inside me like a cathedral bell. An ending, a release. My new home was smaller, a modest apartment by the river. No marble, no velvet, no gold. The walls were plain, the furniture simple. But when I opened the window, the air smelled clean, fresh, untainted. For the first time, the air I breathed belonged to me. On my desk sat a wooden box. Inside, objects that told the story of both captivity and escape. A USB drive, heavy with files, a leather-bound notebook, its pages crammed with secrets, and the wedding ring I had slipped from my finger on the night before his fall. I held the ring again, gold dulled by years of wear, its shine long since stolen by time. I turned it slowly in my palm, and with it came the memories. The dinners where I swallowed words to keep the peace. The parties where I smiled until my face hurt. All for appearances. The nights I lay beside him as he dreamed aloud of power, while I shrank further and further into silence, the ring pressed into my skin, heavy, cold, not love, not promise, not anymore, only memory. I placed it back into the box, closed the lid. The sound was small, but it echoed through the quiet apartment like thunder, final, irrevocable. The sun rose across the water. Light spilled through the curtains, soft and steady, brushing the walls like an artist's hand. The world outside kept moving, indifferent to what had been lost and to what had been won. And yet, in that stillness, I felt something I had not known in years, presence, my own presence, whole, solid, unshaken. I whispered into the morning air, letting the words breathe life. I was the shadow, yes. Shadows memorized the light. He built a kingdom on darkness. And I opened the curtains. My name is Chloe Moore. I don't raise my voice. I raise the truth. I lingered by the window, watching the river shimmer as it carried fragments of night away. The silence around me no longer suffocated. It did not feel like a prison. It surrounded me gently, like an old friend finally returned. Imperfect, honest, free. And I knew this was not the end of my story. It was the beginning of me.